What happens when the house prices rise throughout the roof? They collapse, because unfortunately that's how it works. Last year, house prices increased by the double digits. If you compare that to other assets such as the stocks, that might not seem high. However, a double digits rise in the real estate is the sign of the bubble. The housing market didn't emerge yesterday like cryptocurrencies. It's a well-established market that grows by around 2% annually to the catch up with inflation. However, when prices started rising slightly faster, as they did in 2008, the market crashed. With such low interest rates, it was not easy to sit aside and not take the mortgage or to at last refinance your house because even at 1% difference in your mortgage rate is going to make the huge difference in the long run. Let's say rates do rise a full 1% by the end of this year. How much does 1% difference in the mortgage rate make? If your loan is $200,000, a 1% difference means you will pay an additional $35,000 over the 30 years. That's a lot of money if you ask me, and we didn't even take into account the opportunity cost of money, which means how much that money would have grown in you have invested it. 1% difference on the $2,100 loan equals the additional $239, which equals $518 if you invest it in the S&P 500 for the 30 years, assuming you will get 10% rates of return in the long run. Imagine if your nation negotiated and get the slightly lower rate. You will end up with the extra $500,000 when you retire. I think what's something wrong considering what if your mortgage is $300,000 or $400,000? That numbers would be significantly higher if you borrowed $400,000, you will pay an additional $71,100 in investments over the 30 years, or $400,000, 77 every month. If you count the opportunity cost, it would equals $1 million. That's why whenever you take the mortgage, the number of one things you should pay attention is your mortgage rate. So when the Fed lowers interest rates to almost 0%, everyone had the opportunity to get a mortgage did actually take the mortgage, which led real estate prices to rise significantly. In the middle of the pandemic, real estate prices didn't just rise, but they rose faster than income, which means fewer people can afford a house now, but because the mortgage rates were so low, it still made economic sense to buy a house. But what happens when the mortgage rates will rise? Will eventually will happen, the demand will significantly slow down, which could cause the real estate price to crash. Another factor that we have to consider is rent prices. Usually, rent prices go hand in hand with house prices. Sometimes one grows faster than the others, but not by the huge difference like it happened last year, which meant expect to believe that we might be renting the same path as we did in 2008 if we Fed didn't intervene last year. Then we definitely would have had the real estate collapse since most of people wouldn't be able to pay off their mortgage. Most people live paycheck to paycheck, and the only reasons they qualified for the mortgage is because they had a custom streams of income. But when millions of people suddenly can't make their monthly payments, the bank will freak out and start selling these homes to make the payments. But that means there will be the oversupply of house in the market, which will drive the price down, which will cause the market. The US has already experienced that. Therefore, the government said, listen guys, you can't take 1 year break from your mortgage payments, even if you can afford it. That was the main reason why the market didn't collapse. But that happened when the affordable period is over and the economy hasn't entirely recovered yet. When people have to make their mortgage payments but they don't have the financial ability to do that, the pyramid will finally collapse, especially since the prices were rising faster than ever, and that creates the expectations of the future rise. That expectations attracts speculators who invest in the market hoping to profit from the rising price. This future increases demand and price, causing the bubble to stretch and grow. And no one beautiful day it's going to burst. In 2008, mortgages were not regulated much, so banks started to give in loans randomly. I am not saying that sarcastically, but that's literally what happened. Mortgage on the right end goes so sloppy during the housing bubble that some lenders were giving out ninja loans, no income verifications, no job verifications, nothing. On the other side, developers were building houses faster than the US populations could occupy them. It took a while, but eventually price plugged, people defaulted on their mortgage, and the US economy crashed, helping bring down the global economy with it. When value crashed, some of these home owners were unable to keep making payments, and they couldn't sell the home for the amount they owned. Bank didn't care much since they would take this mortgage, bundle them together and sell them to investors in front of the securities. That's why these banks kept calling people to convince them to take their mortgage and didn't even require them to provide any documentations. It made sense because everyone thought that home prices will always rise. Isn't that what your parents told you? A homeowner, the unexpected happened. If you give it a closer look, the house market today is nothing like it's in 2000s. No one is getting the mortgage unless they can provide that they can pay it off. Secondly, the homeowner of a vacancy rates is 0.9%, the lowest in the US since 1956. In other words, they are the shortage of the house, this time not an excess. And when there is the shortage of the supply in the market, the price naturally rise. Since the 2008 crash, home builders were very careful because the banks have been heavily regulated since then, so there was no point to keep building a new house unless there is the clear demand for them. No one expected that suddenly there is going to be a pandemic and the Fed will lower interest rates to zero and mortgage rates would plummet to the bare minimum. Remember at the beginning of the video where we talked about how big the difference does a single percentage makes in the long run? That's why so many people jumped to buy a house. So even though home prices rose significantly, smaller mortgage payments still attract buyers. However, we also have to consider that 1 in the 10 homeowners who wears a mortgage is behind on the payments. According to the US Department's uh, agriculture, which could lead them to default on their loan. Of course, the forecast program is going to be expanded, but even if it's not, most homeowners have accumulated substantial equity in their homes. Is they could sell them and pay off their mortgage in the full with no sweat, which wasn't the case in 2008 when the fall in the prices caught people off guard with the big mortgage and little or no equity. uh, what's going to happen to the real estate market is entirely based on how well the Fed is going to make it. If the Fed carefully lowers interest rates, there might not be any crash except the price will stop rising or many experience the small decline, but there won't be anything close to a crash. We also have to understand that the real estate market is not like the stock market that moves ups and down every single day. It's a well-established market that moves extremely slowly, and if anything like a crash is on the horizon, it's definitely not happening this year. No one knows the future, and I could be entirely wrong. Since we have the recently came out of the real estate crisis, it's difficult to imagine that another one is on the horizon less than 2 decades later. Meanwhile, if you have the mortgage and you haven't refinanced it yet, then you are missing an opportunity, because getting a low fixed rate for the 30 years is the best things you can wish for. No matter what happens to the market, even those who didn't sell their houses back in 2008 still saw their houses rise in the value over time. So anyone who got the low fixed 30 years old mortgage rate should be fine in the long run. By the way, we have made video on why everyone should invest in the real estates on our second channel. We are have explored the hidden benefits of the investing in the real estates. Please go back to check it out. Make sure you subscribe to that channel, and now give this video the thumbs up if you enjoyed and subscribe if you are the new around here. Thanks for watching, and I see you in the next one.